Hi, I'm Zach with Josh's Frogs, and I'm here with Phil Goss, president of USARK, to talk about the Competes Act, changes possibly the Lacey Act, and its impact on the pet trade. So, Phil, starting us off, welcome. Thanks for agreeing to meet with us. Really appreciate to have a chance to talk to you here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, starting off for people who don't know who you are, who I'm sure are probably few and far between, but probably a staple at a lot of the larger reptile shows and just out there defending our rights. Like, what is your position at USARK? What is USARK's goals, and what's your role in that?
Yeah. So again, Phil Goss, I am president of USARK, which is the United States Association of Reptile Keepers, and we are a 501c6 IRS registered nonprofit working to protect the freedoms of reptile and amphibian keepers across the U.S. and also businesses related to reptiles and amphibians.
Very, very, very cool. So you're basically out there in Washington, defending us from some of this legislation that might impact our ability to keep and breed the animals we love. So I'm hearing a lot. I'm seeing a lot of stuff on social media. I know we've seen it too. This Competes Act and some of the wording that concerns the Lacey Act and what that could impact. Start off, could you talk a little bit about like what the Lacey Act actually is and how that's impacted the pet trade in the past?
Yeah, so the Lacey Act is an old law. It dates all the way back to 1900, and it's got a few parts. What we're talking about specifically is injurious listings under the Lacey Act and the transportation clause of the Lacey Act. So some people are familiar with other things that actually protect wildlife under the Lacey Act. Again, this is a totally different section. It's a different part of the Lacey Act, kind of like traffic laws. There's speeding tickets and there's driving while intoxicated. It's the same kind of thing with the Lacey Act. There's different parts. So again, what we're concerned with is the transportation clause and injurious species. And what these current amendments would do, what we have our alert out for currently, there's really three main parts to it. And I know I'm going to give you a lot of information, but follow along. You can always check out usark.org and then read about what I just talked about too. But the first thing it's going to do, if you've been in the reptile trade for more than 5 years, you may be familiar with USARK's federal lawsuit victory. And what that lawsuit victory did was it allowed species listed as injurious to be transported across state lines. So the people that have already been affected by this are some large constrictor snake species keepers. And then also there's 201 species of salamanders that are listed as injurious. So this has nothing to do with being big and scary or any of that stuff. There's different reasons species can be listed as injurious. So again, immediately
some of these little like 4-6 inch salamanders that
tiny.
aren't really going to hurt anybody.
Yeah, not really a public safety threat there. But again, immediately we would lose that freedom to transport those animals across state lines. And it's not just trade, it's transportation for any reason. So you can't even take an animal across a state line to go to a veterinarian, for example. You couldn't move if you get transferred. Really affects military members because they're transferred all the time. If they had a pet reticulated python or a pet tiger salamander or a listed salamander species, they couldn't take that animal even as a pet across state lines. So that's problem area number one. Problem area number two, it creates a whitelist. And most people are familiar with blacklists or species that are banned. This would create a whitelist and it would tell us what we could import into the United States. So if a species is not on this whitelist, you cannot import it into the United States. And the third, and perhaps almost scariest part of this, is a new emergency designation for FWS. So this literally gives the United States Fish and Wildlife Service the authority to list a species as injurious overnight. It can be listed the same day it's posted in the Federal Register, and then it would be banned from importation and transportation across state lines for any reason. And they don't even have to have any reason for doing it. They can list it, and then they have 3 years to come up with a reason for listing as injurious. So again, and we've, some people can say, we're saying the sky is falling, or we're saying this is going to do things that it isn't, but we've already seen it happen. It's already happened. We saw it with reticulated pythons. They listed that species because it could possibly, there wasn't even science to say that it could possibly become invasive in the southern 4 counties in Florida, and again, possibly the Brownsville area of Texas. So those 2 states had already looked at that species. They already regulated it. And to make it that affect people in Illinois or Oklahoma or California or Maine or wherever you are is just, again, that's very overreaching. And one last point before I let you ask another question. The science they used to list the Burmese and Indian python said that those snakes could live in Maryland. I mean, you have to think about that. The science was so bad, actually said that Burmese and Indian pythons could thrive, survive, and become invasive as far north as Maryland.
I don't know if I could thrive and survive as far as north as Maryland. I struggle with Michigan sometimes, but yeah, that's crazy. So basically, the way this law is written, U.S. Fish and Wildlife could say, okay, we're only going to allow these species to continue to trade at a drop of a hat with no supporting science. Literally because the way it's written, it could be used of just because they feel like it, because what they think is best, but there's no actual reasoning in effect how many thousands of jobs and how many millions of animal keepers who are doing the right thing and keeping their pets responsibly could suddenly find themselves in a state where they may have to get rid of animals, or at the very least not be able to move across state lines or anything with them, much less get more of them from suppliers out of state, and or just decide, no, you can't keep this, and we have 3 years to tell you why, and there's not a set appeals process or way for anyone to contest that during that time. That's some scary stuff. You think if they were, I've heard a lot of people talk about, injurious wildlife, like we want to save endangered species, we care about nature, and I think if you keep pets, you by default probably care about nature and animals, but it seems like the verbiage used could be a lot clearer to make sure that we're protecting those endangered species and habitats and species at threat, and not risk a lot more. It's just really shocking to me.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some Lacey Act it's not the right tool for this. I mean, some of the species listed as injurious we can all agree upon. Zebra mussels
Yeah,
and big head carp. I mean, those are issues, and also those affect a large portion, more than 50% of the United States, where those species could possibly live and become invasive. It's not some tiny little pocket of the US. And also those animals have threats that a lot of the other listed species just simply don't. So it's just too broad and too vague to list a lot of these species found in the pet trade as injurious.
yeah, and how would you even enforce a law like that? I know here in Michigan we had a white list, and it was basically the end result was we report what we sell if it fits into certain categories, because they realized nobody was equipped to identify thousands of different species of catfish in the trade, or hundreds of different frogs. I don't see how on earth that could actually be enforced equitably and accurately, and why states wouldn't be left up to decide what's the best for them and their citizens.
Yeah, it absolutely could not be enforced properly. It would be one of those things where occasionally if someone got caught doing something, obviously they're going to be punished, but yeah, there's no way to watch and track that stuff appropriately. Just absolutely
It's
not.
just, yeah, a shame, because when it can't be watched and tracked appropriately, it just goes underground and gets harder to do and more harmful potentially to do too. You can't monitor
Yeah,
it.
and what you get, like you get a black market and you get the wrong people doing it.
Yeah.
And then, someone who probably doesn't even know that it's a law and accidentally transports an animal across state lines, that's the person who's going to get in trouble and they're going to make an example
It's
out of
just
that
wild. Like,
person.
what if somebody's moving some potted plants or landscaping supplies, and there's a salamander that burrowed into that bag of mulch for winter? Like, technically they just broke a federal law.
Yeah.
That's insane. Oh, that's scary. So say you're as scared as I am, or as nervous as I am about this, and what this could mean for not only the pet trade and like the business I'm in, but also just my personal enjoyment. I mean, hey, there's turtles right over there that could be impacted by this thing. Like that's kind of disturbing. What can I do about it?
Yeah, it's a big deal. And this is the first time we've obviously seen herpetoculture deal with this before, but this is the first time we've seen so many groups get in and voice opposition to some of these FWS regulations. So, I mean, the National Aquaculture Alliance, the American Federation of Aviculture, PJAC, the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council, all kinds of groups are on board now, and the legislators are hearing about it. So that's good.
That's awesome.
And it's super easy. I mean, one of the easiest things to do is just go to our website, USARK.org, and we've got a sticky alert at the very top of the page. It's the first post. So it'll always stay at the top. Well, this is a serious issue. Just click on it and scroll down a little bit. If you want to read about what's going on, obviously you can, but it has a link that you click so you can contact your senators. It has sample messaging there. It has, if you call them, it even gives you a couple sentences to say if you call in. You can obviously take our sample message and turn that into a letter or fax and send those in. So again, we have all the steps. It's right there, super easy for you to do. I mean, depending on what you do, if all you think you want to do is send an email, I mean, you can do it in less than a minute. If you do all the steps, it's going to take you maybe 5 minutes. So certainly super easy for people to get involved and engage in this.
That is wild. And that's a good point you brought up when we were talking about fish a little bit. Like, this isn't just reptiles and amphibians. Like, that's what I'm passionate about. But I mean, I know there's a lot of crazy invertebrate people out there and a lot of crazy fish people who are just like us crazy frog and snake people. Like what all groups, like, this is a huge part of the pet trade and, people's rights to keep animals at stake here. Like, what's all impacted by this law potentially?
Yeah, so obviously we don't know what species are going to be listed. That's a common
That's so
question out there.
crazy.
People are like, what's on the white list? There is no white list yet.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to be on it. And there's just so many issues with even creating that white list. But it could impact any species that could possibly be invasive anywhere in the US. So again, it doesn't matter if it's 50% of the US or 0.5% of the US, because we already saw that with reticulated pythons. And there's other reasons for listings too. The salamanders were listed because they could possibly carry the B sow fungus. Possibly. It's not, they don't have to test positive for it. They don't have to come from somewhere that may have it. It's just because they could possibly carry that. Even if they're captive bred animals that have been tested for B sow free, you still can't ship them across.
Yeah, that's something. All of our amphibians at Josh's Frogs, we check for B sow. That's part of our testing, and we're participating in some studies and pilot programs to figure out how to kind of implement that testing en masse. But as of right now, there's been no confirmed solid positive B sow case in the US. So it's important to keep it from getting here. I guess if some of y'all don't know, like the Smoky Mountains, that's like the Newton salamander, the caudate, the gummy lizard hotspot of the world, believe it or not, is right here in the good old US of A. But we can test for that stuff. And if that's that issue, like let's get specific and solve that instead of this giant net that pulls everything else with it. That's just crazy.
Right, and that's a great example. I mean, Josh's Frogs, you guys are going far and above. I mean, you're doing all this testing. Obviously, some other breeders and businesses have too, but you guys are doing everything you can to make sure you're shipping out, animals without B sow. And if something like this passed, that wouldn't matter. That's another shame of it. Even if you're responsible and do everything you can, it doesn't matter. These are just species listings. There's nothing that says, oh, if it's from a B sow free facility, you can ship it. Nope, just species. That's all that's going to be looked at. And another clarification there, because of the way the statute is worded, it reads wild mammals, wild birds. So a lot of people think this only applies to wild caught animals. It absolutely does not. It doesn't matter if it's captive bred or wild caught. Again, it's just the species. So it doesn't matter if your salamander was bred at Josh's Frogs or if it was captured from the country of origin. It's just the species.
That's just wild. That's really wild to me. So after people call their senators, they reach out to the legislatures, they maybe throw some money at USARK to keep you well caffeinated and and power in Washington taking care of us, and say, competes doesn't pass. If we defeat competes, is that the end of it? If we get this legislation removed, or if the act itself doesn't pass, is that the end of it and we're all safe and hunky-dory and happy and healthy forever and ever?
Unfortunately,
please? No.
No, unfortunately not. So yeah, this is a way bigger issue, and a couple things on that. So the Competes Act, we could care less about the Competes Act. Doesn't deal with herpetoculture or the animal industry. It's 90% plus dealing with the advancing the US's economic strength in the field of technology. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be about. This was kind of slipped in there. It's less than 1% of the bill. And so again, we're not trying to stop the Competes Act, just this certain section with these Lacey Act amendments. And even though it's going to go away temporarily, so let me explain that real quick. So the House bill was HR 4521. That's the Competes Act that everybody's talking about. It's actually going to be reconciled or merged on the Senate side with Senate Bill 1260. So those two bills, again, they're going to come together and merge. These Lacey Act amendments are essentially going to go away temporarily because the language from the House bill is going to go away, be replaced by the Senate bill. But then we have to keep making noise because we do not want these Lacey Act amendments to come back into the reconciled bill. So that's threat number one. Threat number two is this language that was actually introduced last year by Florida Senator Rubio as Senate Bill 626. So this is even floating around as its own bill. That bill never got any traction or went to hearing. That's why this Competes Act talk kind of took precedent, because this language is actually passed one chamber of Congress. But unfortunately, this is probably going to come back. And the main reason for making so much noise now, again, we're not trying to stop the Competes Act. We're just trying to make enough noise about these Lacey Act amendments that maybe they go away for a session or two and we can get some reprieve. Because even if we stopped at Competes Act, we could see it back as a standalone bill. It's already out there from Senator Rubio. We could see it next session. But if we educate legislators enough on the consequences, there may not be a legislator who wants to introduce it for a session or two. And again, it kind of go away.
That is wild to me. That just like, that seems really sneaky. I guess to kind of throw it in there, like how many, isn't the Competes Act, I think it's hundreds of pages.
Well, yeah, it's big. It started out as 2,912. That's where we found section 71102 is where these Lacey Act amendments are found. But now the Competes Act is actually 3,610 pages because there were 200 amendments added onto it before it went to the Senate. It took them, I think, 2 weeks just to finish the final version of it. So again, yeah, 3,600 pages this thing is now. It's crazy how much stuff is in there.
That's insane. I'm in the library, so this book is 300 pages, so 12 times that, and I'm sure there's probably more words on a page than here.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty big font for visually impaired people like me. That's insane. Like,
It is.
who actually sits down and reads and understands that, like, the material and then votes a simple yes or no? It seems like that should be broken down and problems should be tackled a lot more.
It should, and you bring up a good point. That's why you got to contact your legislators, because as Zach just said, even legislators aren't reading these. I actually watched a 45-minute rant from a member of Congress saying, how many of my fellow congressmen and women have actually read this? They're like, because they don't, honestly, they just don't have time. This is one bill and it's 3,000 pages. Think how many bills they have. That's why they have a lot of staff, and it's the staff who keeps them informed on this stuff. And if you don't contact them and say, hey, there's an issue, they're not going to know about it.
That is disturbing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, man, I thought those high school government, I almost feel misled by those high school government courses and stuff a little bit. They're like, this isn't how it's supposed to work, but the truth of the world here. Cool. That was really informative. I know I learned a lot, and I'm about, even though I haven't gotten much sleep last night, I think I'm about to go get on the phone and talk to a senator right after we let you go. Anything else we should cover? Anything else you want to inform our listeners about?
Yeah, I mean, we'll post updates. I know a lot of people freak out. They want some kind of update every day, and there's just not going to be one.
Yeah.
When after this passed the House, Senate was on a 2-week recess. They came back. They had to deal with budget issues. Re-election campaigns are starting up. We obviously have the Ukraine-Russia conflict. There's a lot of other stuff going on. There's not going to be, sometimes it's going to be weeks before we get an update. We anticipated that it's going to be what's called a conference committee is going to be formed with both senators and representatives that are going to look at both these bills. And that should happen sometime this month, but we don't have really a timeline on when that's going to happen. So I know it's been quiet for USARK. Our last update was on Valentine's Day. We actually posted an update, but there just hasn't been anything to talk about. So I know some people get antsy, but just keep doing it. If you emailed or called your senators, do it again. You can start contacting your representatives now, but the main thing is please don't just send an email. Emails are probably at the bottom as far as what's most effective. It is much more effective, believe it or not, even to write and fax letters and then also make phone calls. So it's okay to send the emails too, but it's best to do all four if you can. And if you have a way to get an in-person meeting, obviously do that. That's definitely at the top as far as engagement.
Yeah. And when people are calling in, they're probably going to be talking to like staff members and stuff, I imagine. A lot of times people who are paid or volunteer, not the people who actually wrote this stuff. So they may not even be aware of what's going on. So I think in that case, probably when you're reaching out, being really kind and understanding, and be firm with your beliefs. But this is easy to get upset about, but probably don't share your frustrations, but don't take it out on the person on the other end of the phone. We want them to help us out here.
It is, and that's such a good point, Zach, because the worst thing you can do is call in and start calling them names or send them email messages where you're calling them names. That is the absolute worst thing you can do for a couple reasons. One, because it paints all of us in a bad light. And two, when a group like USARK goes in and actually has a face-to-face meeting and we want to talk to them, and the first thing we hear is, oh, you represent those people who are calling in and calling me names and cussing at me. That's that. Then we got to get past that hurdle before we can even get into what we're there to meet about. So yeah, please, please, please be civil and professional. I know it can be tough and it's an emotional subject, but yeah, please just be civil and professional.
Cool. We'll go ahead when this is published out. We'll make sure we link to the USARK's website, those update pages, so people can, you know, stay informed that way. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat, and thanks a lot for the info. It's scary, but feel better knowing you're out there looking out for us. And yeah, please, by all means, reach out, and if we can help you out in any way, please let us know.
Oh, thank you much. One more thing before I go,
Yeah.
for those who haven't seen it, again, we have that sticky alert, but we have 2 links at the very top of that alert that are for printable flyers. So especially for people who are going to reptile shows, or if you have a connection with a pet shop, or if you're sending out shipments of animals, these are great to put out because one's got a QR code on it that you can scan and it takes you to alert. One's kind of a longer info sheet that tells you about what's going on, but the other one's a kind of flashy version that's got a frog on one side and a veiled chameleon on the other side. So just short bullet points on what's going on, but that really helps to spread awareness again. And as Zach brought up earlier, this is not just reptiles and amphibians. This is birds, this is exotic mammals, it's aquaculture. So anybody that you know doing any of that kind of stuff should be aware of this.
Yeah, that is, yeah. Wow.
Good.
Seems so dirty, you know?
We'll stop it, but you know, there's
Yeah.
you got to make noise, because legislators, again, they listen to you when they've heard from their constituents. So the more people who are contacting them, the better it is when we go in and talk to them.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Phil. Once again, appreciate the conversation. Looking forward to seeing you at some of the big reptile shows this year or whatnot. You know, we'll be making sure that we have some donations to help you guys out and stuff there.
Cool. Appreciate
that's
it.
awesome. Really appreciate what y'all do for taking care of us. So
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for the time.
bye.